Hi, this is Deborah Anderson, the BlkWmnAnimator, and I want to talk today about increasing diversity in animation, specifically my role in increasing diversity in animation and the topics that surround that. First, I like to make sure that I am out in the community speaking to schools and community organizations about being an animator, because I think it's good for kids to see that there is someone who looks like them that is doing something that they want to do. So as a Black person, as a woman, I want to expose minority kids and little girls to the fact that you can do this too. Something else that I want to do is increase the diversity in the diversity. So sometimes the minorities and the women in the animation industry have the same interests as the majority. Not always, but sometimes. So they can have the same interest in video games, the same interest in TV shows, sometimes that same culture where they're not adding anything different to the stories. So we all know that minority communities and women are not a monolith. So there's all these different types of stories that people have to tell. So I want to try and work on exposing animation to as many communities, as many socioeconomic statuses as possible to get that variety in stories. To go along with increasing the diversity in diversity, I would like to figure out how to make animation more palatable for the elderly community, because there are senior sitters all across the country that are trying to figure out activities for seniors to do. And if I can figure out how to put maybe a programming facade on the animation program to make it more palatable and get elderly more interested in animation, I feel like that would be an awesome idea to increase the diversity. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, trying to get even the small kids interested in animation. Now, there's usually this lower limit of age that I like to have for my workshops, because that increases the amount of ability of keeping the attention of the student. But I would like to eventually learn how to lower that limit so that I can teach animation to even maybe 4- and 5-year-olds. But just figuring out how to keep them interested would be an interesting journey for me. Something else that I want to do is provide a lower barrier to entry to the animation industry by learning Blender. So Blender is a free open source 3D program that you can download to your computer and do 3D animation. I actually did my first workshop in Blender a couple weeks ago at the NOLA Mini Maker Fair, and it was a great success. So I want to continue that journey of learning Blender and kind of falling on the sword and taking the beating, because Blender can be counterintuitive. So I want to learn all that I can to make it easier for my future students so that they can have that option and have that lower barrier to entry. Now, you still have to have a laptop, so depending on what your family can afford, that could be the barrier to entry. But I'm trying to take away that price point of purchasing a 3D animation program, because Maya has a free educational license that I think it expires after 3 years, and then Cinema 4D has an educational license for 18 months. So having that free program, that free option, can kind of have that longevity if you get introduced to animation at a younger age. Another thing that I would like to do is educate communities on how lucrative animation is and can be as a career path. So a lot of times animation is associated with this starving artist trope. So parents discourage their children from going into any career that's art related. But in actuality, animation can be very lucrative as a career, and you can end up making a lot of money. I went to the Contemporary Art Center conversation on comics, graphic novels, and inclusivity, and I got to have a conversation with LaShawn Thomas, who's the director of Boondocks season 1 and 2, and we like a bunch of us had a conversation about why Black people specifically are not in animation, and there were 2 points that he made. There are 2 reasons that Black people are not in animation: family and environment. So a lot of times, a lot of people who are not encouraged by their family members are not going to go into a certain path. So when a kid wants to do animation and their parents aren't really supportive of it, there is that low percentage who will continue to do that anyway. So if we can educate more parents, more families about how they won't be out on the street or struggling through their life if they go into a career in animation, then that will be better for the industry and better for that child. Another reason was environment. Sometimes your environment is not conducive to being exposed to certain career paths, whether that's dependent on your socioeconomic status or even on being that outcast who is different, especially in minority communities. But also, you're not going to have your next door neighbor being an animator. So if I can kind of go around and show kids that you can do this and it can be lucrative, I think that will be a great thing. Additionally, sometimes parents, they only have but so much information. So sometimes they are trying to either get their child to be an athlete, or on the other side of the spectrum, be a doctor or a lawyer. But that is not the only way to be successful. So I want to introduce the students and the parents to that other career path that you can go into where you can be successful. Something that I hope happens is that by increasing the diversity and the amount of people that are exposed to animation, that will create a boom in the indie industry with the advent of, YouTube and Vimeo and other platforms where people can work on their own stories and create their own animations and get a multitude of stories out there. So that indie industry, like in other industries where Justin Bieber was on YouTube, Drake, Aubrey Graham was on MySpace, and all these people who are coming up through these alternate conventions, Instagram, Vine, and Snapchat, and all this stuff. I hope that happens for the animation industry by me personally taking that role and exposing as many people to animation, and so they can go to back to their house and create their own story. Another thing that I hope happens is that kids can express themselves about the situations they are living in and expose those conditions to people. So I think that, there's art therapy, so I think animation can be used in that. And so if there's like the PTSD of living in an urban area, that depression, bullying, or even if you want to do a story on having great parents despite your environment. I think there's a multitude of things that kids can have to say, and I want their stories to be told. So I'm trying to just expose animation to as many people as possible, just to have that diversity of thought and in story. And speaking of diversity of thought about animation, I want to expose it to more people so that they understand that animation is not just for kids. I don't know how we got to that point, because at the beginning of animation, when we had Gertie the Dinosaur, that was targeted at adults. And even with our Disney and Pixar animations, a lot of those topics are pretty heavy topics. So how we got this association that animation is just for kids, I have no clue. But animation is for everybody. And if we expose more people to animation, then you have less people thinking animation is just for kids, you won't have these parents who are taking their kids to see Rango and Sausage Party just because it's the animation, and even though it has a rated R rating or a PG-13 rating. So I want to expose animation to more people so they understand that animation is limitless and to not put it in a box. So at the end of the day, I'm on my Lonzo Ball. We push the culture forward. Don't let the culture push us. Let's increase diversity in animation. Let's get it. Let's go.